All right. Within the last 24 to 48 hours, we've had serious protests, violence occurring in Nepal, specifically in Kathmandu. We've had demonstrators defying curfews. They've broken into and set fire to the parliament building. We've seen on social media clips of various government representatives dragged down the street. I think is it the current or the former finance minister also attacked in and around a river. In the last sort of 12 hours, we have had the reinforcement of the curfew. And at the time of recording here on the 10th of September, we've seen things settle down a little bit, but I think the ingredients are definitely there for things to escalate once again. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister stepped down. And also, unfortunately, 19 people have lost their lives by the hands of the security forces in violent demonstrations. So the situation remains very fluid and uncertain, but to just help us understand some of the background as to what's going on there at the moment and possible implications for South Africa, given some similarity in terms of the conditions, the sort of ingredients for this kind of social unrest. We are joined today by Mr. Ricardo Teixeira. Ricardo, thanks very much for your time. Ricardo, of course, now at the Daily Friend, associate editor. So lots for you on a daily basis to deal with, Ricardo, from an editing and writing point of view. So we do appreciate your time here. We'll just do a sort of short discussion in terms of your thoughts around what's going on. So can you just give us a little bit of background, what sort of really gave the spark to the process that we've seen? We have had for a long time, you've had relatively low economic growth, high unemployment in Nepal, but what has now caused the latest sort of spate of serious protests to happen?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. So there's been quite a mixing pot of different factors that caused this, and some of them may seem familiar to our South African viewers. You had high youth unemployment. New York Times describes getting a job in Nepal as a Herculean task. So a lot of people, young people that are educated and are looking for opportunities, are very frustrated with the system. You had high levels of corruption in the government, low levels of public trust in the government, and a government that has repeatedly failed to listen to its citizens. And in an attempt to censure the public, in a sense, the government tried to ban, I believe it was 26 different social media apps, including WeChat, WhatsApp, Instagram. The main thing is that a lot of the young people that leave Nepal in order to find work send money home or remittances, and these apps are their main form of communicating with their loved ones back home. So it completely cut off some communication between people inside Nepal and their loved ones that are supporting them outside the country. And I think the overall mistrust of the government, the heightened frustration and the anger, it all just reached the boiling point. And like the Soviet Union, it all was until it wasn't, and it came crashing down relatively quickly. We've seen in the last 72 hours, I mean, the protests got really intense on Monday. It's been about 48 hours of deadly protests, but the military reinstituted a curfew last night. Things seem a little quieter today. There's reports of lots of soldiers in the street. Vehicle and foot traffic is low. People are starting to sweep the streets, and I wouldn't say a sense of calm has returned, but it's more like there's an eerie silence. I believe it was the finance minister that was whipped and chased into a river. Apparently the wife of a former MP was burnt alive. The prime minister has fled the country. It's Parliament was burnt down. The palace was burnt down. Several government buildings were burnt down, and it seems like it reached a crescendo and a massive explosion, and now there's just this sudden silence.
Ricardo, in terms of sort of the major global powers and their possible involvement, do you have any indications that from China, from maybe India, from the US, of course, that there's any providing support to protesters or to the government from any of those?
There seems to be no real support from this kind of seems to have happened in a vacuum where Nepal sandwiched between India and China, and there hasn't really seemed to be much coming from either side there. It was a communist government, and again their offices were burnt down as well. There's been no support from the Chinese or the Russians. Americans have been relatively quiet on this, and it's all just happened so quickly that it's who really knows. Yeah.
I think that's a good point. There is so much developing in the last week, never mind the last year, in global sort of unrest and upheaval. We also saw overnight, we won't get into that now, but we saw Russian drones incurring, and according to some reports, it's sort of targeting Polish infrastructure in Poland itself. So we are seeing much more volatility in various regions around the world, not least of which, of course, in Nepal and in Europe. But Ricardo, to maybe link this, to try and link what is going on in Nepal with the situation in South Africa, we've got, as you rightly, we've highlighted or touched on, we've got long-term low growth in South Africa. Between 2012 and 2023, we averaged 0.8%. If you take that in concert with high youth unemployment and high unemployment, especially on the expanded definition, so those individuals who are discouraged job seekers who might want to work, but just because of the economic policy environment, businesses aren't employing and investing. Do you see any parallels here between what's happened in Nepal with South Africa? I'm not obviously going to try and put you on the spot and say, oh, is this going to happen tomorrow in South Africa? But are you seeing some of the ingredients that could be similar?
There's definitely quite a few of the ingredients: the high youth unemployment, the economic stagnation, frustration with the government, a government that is perceived as corrupt and not listening to its citizens, that support is slipping and seeming lower by the day. I don't think it's going to happen here. I mean, I'm not a fortune teller, so I can't make those sorts of predictions. But there's definitely some parallels that we should be, the government should heed some warnings from, and not just the South African government, but we've seen again these instances also play out in Bangladesh. We saw it in Sri Lanka, and we've also seen it in Kenya and Tanzania, where young people are getting angry and frustrated with the status quo, specifically governments where things are not as economically expansive as they aspire to be. And, there's high youth unemployment, there's a level of corruption or lower levels of democratic freedoms. It's, the government should be paying attention here, because we've seen, 2 days and the government seems to have completely collapsed and the military's had to step in, and we don't really know what's going to happen next. We don't know if they're going to have an election, if there's going to be an interim government, if they could go the way of other countries in Asia where it becomes a military government for a while. It's quite alarming. And if we had to, again, look at our current situation, would SANDF be able to restore order?
Very arguably not. Just to link, I think, what you mentioned there around the, things seeming fine, the sort of house of cards, things seem okay until they're not. So our colleague, the CEO of the Institute of Race Relations, Dr. John Endres, had a piece out in Business Day, I think it was last week, just around the ANC's decline, and just the biggest thing that probably is going at the moment for the ANC that is going in terms of what is sort of out of the picture now is the belief in the ANC. So amongst South Africans, amongst not least ANC voters, former ANC voters, once that belief is gone, it's arguably very difficult to get it back. So just tell us a bit about the importance of having, that believability in a sort of central government, in a central, force, as it were, because once that goes, what replaces it?
The funny thing is, within some of the members of the ANC that I've spoken to, there's this acceptance that once political support is lost, you don't get it back. I think they're starting to realize that they're never going to have a majority again, that those days are long gone. And I hope that they're starting to realize that, once it bottoms out, it bottoms out. It's very hard to come back from. And you need that sort of legitimacy if you are leading the country. It's very, very quickly when support collapses, like I think in most mature democracies, that the president or the prime minister will resign and they'll have a snap election and things will change out. That hasn't been the case in South Africa because we haven't been in that environment or that territory yet. So I would love to know the day when, or I'd love to know what will happen the day when the ANC leaders, when an election result comes in or a strong public opposition to their rule comes in, and they finally see the writing on the wall and see that, hey, we don't have the public support anymore. What do we do now? Like, are they going to, pack their bags and run? Are they going to do the confident and quiet bow out and respect the democratic process and call for a snap election, or accept the result if it is an election and just become the opposition? I would love to know. And I don't think that day is far off. I think it'll happen in the next 2 election cycles. We've got the local government elections next year, and then we have the elections again in 2029. I think the ANC is in a bad way, and I don't know if they're going to be able to save themselves. It's very rare for people that in an organization that creates a problem to solve it in this sort of way, specifically when we talk in politics. Just look at the Conservative government in the UK. I mean, they ruled for 14 years and then very quickly out, gone. But is that going to happen with the ANC? I think that this is all uncharted territory, not just for South Africans, but for the ANC. So it's going to be a tense one.
Indeed. And speaking of adding more ingredients into that volatile mix, just to get your thoughts on sort of trends in neighboring countries around South Africa. So it's one thing to say, if this happens in South Africa itself and what that would do to the region, given how important the South African economy continues to be, to sort of just, around 0.5% growth and activity in the region. We obviously want higher growth, but at least there's still something going on. We still have relatively well-developed infrastructure. Our financial sector, of course, very well-developed. So don't discount that things, from an economic and quality of life point of view, could get worse should South Africa go in this kind of, a revolution direction. I don't want to discount the many failures and shortcomings of the ANC, but there is always something worse around the corner. Just in terms of countries in the region, any that you want to highlight specifically, and what the implications would be on South Africa should something happen like this in Zimbabwe or in Mozambique or elsewhere?
I'm very concerned about the state in northern Mozambique. We are seeing the insurgents grow a bit, and they're starting to head west and south. I think they've realized that as long as they leave the Total gas plant alone, the government leaves them alone, because it's very clear that the government in Maputo doesn't really care about the population in the north. They don't seem to be too concerned with the terrorism issues there. And as long as the terrorists exist, they get peace support from I think it's the EU Peace Fund, and then also from the UN. There's a brigade of Mozambican troops that are trained up and equipped, but they are staying in Maputo. They're not going up to the north to fight. The troops in the north are very poorly equipped. The insurgents seem to be using the waterways now. I was last week sitting in a discussion about the security in the Mozambique Channel, and one of the things that came out from one of the analysts was that, I'm not sure what the time period was, but they pointed towards that in a recent period, I believe the last year or two, that approximately 120 civilians have been killed by the government out on the ocean and the waterways by the Mozambican Navy in patrolling for insurgents. Insurgents seem to be blending in with the local populace and using fishing boats to move up and down the rivers and amongst the islands. And the government has started enforcing fuel limitations to restrict that main form of transport in the area and livelihood. And the insurgents have started going to the funerals and giving cash to families and, trying to play a hearts and minds game, saying, sorry, this has happened to you. This is not coming from the state. So it's a very precarious situation in northern Mozambique. I'm very alarmed by it. And if that were to spread into the areas that are under Renamo control, and we see Renamo is already frustrated with the government about not doing much in northern Mozambique. If they start having to take on the insurgents and pick up arms once again, we could very easily end up with a similar situation to Syria happening in Mozambique, where we have a civil war between the government, an insurgent group, and a revolutionary group that wants to overthrow the government, where, if this is also, again, like Syria, will probably pull in the neighboring countries. I mean, we could see a high influx of migrants and a humanitarian crisis forcing people to flee into South Africa. There is a railway line that connects Harare to one of the ports in Mozambique. I don't believe it's Beira, but it runs through Mozambique, and it is a main transport corridor for exports for Zimbabwe. If that becomes threatened by the insurgents and then moves south, it would pull Zimbabwe in. Again, this instability on that northern border with Tanzania, it would also pull Tanzania in. And if they continue moving west through Niassa National Park, as they appear to be, because there hasn't really been a state presence there, they could end up in Lake Malawi, and they could pull in Malawi. So we could very easily end up with a small little insurgency or civil war that spills into a regional crises. And it would be quite alarming. It would get out of hand very quickly. And I don't think, again, that SANDF has the ability to respond.
Yeah, I think that is very well summarized and does add more into the mix for the South African government to be, if they're not, which they might not be aware of yet, more for them to be aware of and make the right kind of policy choices that would put South Africa on the better kind of path to be able to deal with and influence at least some of the instability in our region should it arise. We should also add, maybe as a final sort of context point, given the many changes in US trade, investment, sort of geostrategic positioning and priorities, given that I think the US is going to focus more on sort of the Western Hemisphere and its immediate region from a sort of security point of view, this opens up more spaces for uncertainty and volatility in other places around the world. It's not to discount shortcomings of US foreign policy over many decades, especially in the Middle East. But if that sort of one global military superpower does pull back or prioritize certain regions over others, you just have more spaces for something like this to crop up more regularly than it would do otherwise. But Ricardo, I think we're going to wrap up there. I think a good overview that we've covered the situation in Nepal, some possible learnings for South Africa. Let's see how the situation continues in that country. And of course, we'll keep tabs on all things in South African politics, economics, as well as in the region. To all of you, thanks very much for joining. We'll be back here on the CRA YouTube channel very soon. Bye-bye.